What would you do if the person you love the most turned out to be the one quietly destroying everything that makes you feel like you? He used to believe that marriage meant connection, meant sharing, even the little things like personal interests. But just 7 months into living together, he discovered his cherished Star Wars models, the ones he'd collected and protected for over 15 years, had been thrown in the trash, burned, and ripped apart by his wife. No warning, no chance to defend the things he loved. Why would a woman who claimed to love him do something like that? And is it true that when love turns into marriage, your personal passions must be completely sacrificed? Today's story isn't just about a few toys. It's about the right to exist as your true self in a relationship. Before the wedding, everything seemed perfect. They fell in love over quiet coffee dates, early morning jogs, and quiet weekend nights where he'd sit patiently painting every tiny detail on his Warhammer 40K models while she read books or watched documentaries. Two worlds that seemed so different, yet somehow moved in harmony, rooted in respect. He was 31, a man of small but deeply rooted passions. Since his teenage years, gaming a few hours a week and collecting Star Wars figures wasn't just a hobby, it was how he balanced life, how he found himself again after long, exhausting workdays. Every item on the shelf told a story. Every character in a game held a piece of memory. It wasn't childish. It was personal. It was him and her, 37, mature, logical, with high standards for lifestyle. Before marriage, she had gently suggested, maybe later on, we can both live a bit healthier together. Okay? He smiled, thinking she meant eating better, exercising more, staying fit. Nothing unreasonable. He agreed, wholeheartedly. But everything started to change right after the wedding. The peaceful evening slowly became a list of rules: mealtime, bedtime, workout time. And then came something that had never been part of the deal. No gaming, no model collecting. No time spent on what she called pointless, childish hobbies. At first, he thought these were just offhand remarks, but then came the sighs every time he turned on his console, the eye rolls when he carefully labeled a new box of models. Once, she said flat out, "You're over 30 and still playing with this stuff. I'm honestly worried about our future." He gave a weak smile and changed the subject, but inside, something went cold. He started storing his things more discreetly, no longer displaying them like before. His little joys now tucked away like some secret sin. And sometimes he wondered, is this the price of growing up? Is this what it takes to build a stable marriage? Then one day, he walked down to the basement, once his little kingdom, and froze. Every Star Wars model was gone. The shelves stood bare, terrifying in their silence. Panicked, he searched every drawer, every closet, even the trash bins around the house, until he found them. In the giant garbage can by the garage, some torn apart, some melted as if burned, some just broken limbs twisted out of shape. No warning, no conversation. She had deliberately destroyed everything. Pieces he had spent his entire youth collecting, treasuring. He took photos. He texted her, asking why. She didn't reply. Not that day, not a word. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about a few toys being broken. It was about losing control over his own life. That night, when she got home, he couldn't stay silent any longer. With no other option, he showed her the photos he had taken from the trash, the warped, melted plastic pieces, the half-burned faces of his favorite characters. She glanced at them briefly. No remorse, no surprise, no apology. She simply said, her voice cold, "I did it because you need to grow up." That sentence felt like a cold knife slicing through his heart. He tried to stay calm and asked, "Why didn't you talk to me first? Why destroy everything?" "You know they meant something to me." She cut him off immediately. "Because I did talk. You didn't listen. I saw you secretly buying more toys. I saw you spending entire evenings on those stupid games instead of doing yoga with me. I didn't marry a little boy. I married a man." Anger surged in him, but was quickly smothered by a wave of helplessness. He started to explain that those models weren't just toys, but memories. A harmless hobby. That there was no reason to erase them completely. He wanted to share a life with her, but he also wanted to remain himself. But she wouldn't hear it. Arms crossed, back straight, voice rising, If you don't get rid of that junk, don't expect me to even touch you. You hear me? I feel sick just watching you mess with that childish crap. I can't stand it." There was no attempt to hide the threat, and it wasn't just contempt in her voice. It was disgust, as if his hobby were a disease. He stood there like a kid scolded in front of the entire classroom, lost for words, paralyzed. Every argument he had rehearsed suddenly felt meaningless under the emotional pressure she was building. Finally, in the weakest moment of his life, he nodded. "Okay, I'll get rid of it." Not because he agreed, not because he thought it was wrong, but just so she would stop yelling, stop criticizing, stop tearing away the last shred of peace he had in this house. She said nothing, just turned and marched upstairs, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. He remained in the kitchen, alone, beside a trash can filled with the ashes of his childhood and pieces of his identity, now nothing but burnt plastic and cold smoke. From that night on, no one ever spoke of hobbies again. But something new took root, an unspoken rule in the house. No games, no models, no drawing, no talking about anything he loved. The house became spotless, polished, and completely soulless. He tried to cooperate, exercised with her, learned to cook healthy meals, meditated at night. But his mind kept drifting back to the quiet joy of gaming, the hours spent carefully painting tiny Warhammer soldiers, the thrill of opening a new model kit. All of it, now stamped forbidden. Once he dared to turn on his console while she was away on a work trip, a small rebellion in the shadows. But she came home early, caught him, smashed the console on the floor and stepped on it. No apology, just one sentence. "I warned you." After that, he played in secret, bought things in secret, hid them like a criminal. He wasn't living anymore. He was just hiding inside his own marriage. Since that confrontation, his life veered onto a completely different path. Quiet, yes, but dark and fractured. On the surface, he was the good husband by his wife's standards. Waking up early, semi-vegetarian, meditating every night, hitting the gym 3 times a week. But inside, he was eroding, bit by bit, under the weight of losing himself. He began living 2 lives. One public life, where every action was filtered through her expectations, checked, measured, and approved. And another life, silent, secretive, hidden in drawer corners, basement shelves, or during quiet lunch breaks at work. He installed a game on his office computer, not to play for hours, but just to see the familiar interface for a few minutes a day. He ordered tiny Star Wars figurines, shipped to a close friend's address, stashed later in his car trunk. Some nights, he would sit in his parked car, engine off, in the garage, just holding a thumb-sized Darth Vader, as if finally breathing again after months of suffocating. The guilt was constant, not because he was doing something wrong, but because he had to lie to protect the pieces of himself that used to matter. Whenever he looked into his wife's eyes, he didn't see a partner. He saw a wall, someone who demanded, controlled, and only recognized the approved versions of him. Everything else, his passions, his quirks, his childhood joys, was deemed embarrassing or disposable. He tried to talk. One night, gently after dinner, he said he felt smothered, that he couldn't keep burying all the things he loved. He needed space, a little freedom to just be himself. But she didn't hesitate. Her response was immediate. "No, if you're still holding on to those things, then clearly we don't share the same values. I'm not living with someone stuck in the past." He repeated that line in his head all night. "We don't share the same values." He didn't argue, just nodded, silently. And that night, he returned to the garage, opened the trunk, held that small box of miniatures close to his chest, and breathed like a man cornered. It's been over 7 months since he agreed to temporarily give it all up. But nothing about this was temporary. She didn't want compromise. She wanted erasure. And he wasn't living. He was sneaking his existence in shadows. He felt like a child punished to stand in a corner just for loving things others didn't understand. Worse, whenever she caught him, she destroyed everything. No questions, no conversation, only anger, accusations. She acted like he had betrayed her, when all he'd done was hide a plastic toy in a drawer. And he was afraid, truly afraid, not of her, but of what he was becoming. He feared that, if this continued, he'd be nothing but a shell. that one day he'd look in the mirror and see no trace of who he used to be, just a version she approved of, clean, perfect, and completely hollow. And then, the thing he feared most finally happened. She found out he was still playing video games. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. She had told him she'd be at the spa with friends from morning till night. He felt like a kid who'd just been told school was canceled. He immediately plugged his console into the TV and launched the game he hadn't touched in over 6 months. The music kicked in. The screen lit up. For the first time in months, he felt alive. He played like it was his last chance, laughing out loud, leaning forward with every movement, completely losing track of time. What he didn't know was that she came home early. The door opened, no footsteps, and when he finally turned around, she was already standing there, silent, cold. There was no yelling, not at first, just a look, like she was staring at a traitor. Then chaos erupted. She lunged at the console, yanked out the power cord, and slammed it to the tiled floor. The sound of it breaking echoed like a gunshot in their small home. He rushed forward to stop her, but she shoved him away, screaming, "How many times have I warned you? And yet you sneak around like some addict, you liar!" For the first time, he said nothing. He just stood there, motionless, hands by his sides, staring at the shattered pieces on the floor. It wasn't because the device was valuable, it was because he knew. That was the last time he could pretend this life could go on like this. She kept yelling, calling him useless, immature, a burden to this marriage. But this time, he didn't hear those words the way he used to. This time, they rang like an alarm clock, waking him up from a long, exhausting sleep. She didn't just hate his hobby, she hated who he truly was. He realized the past few months hadn't been about working through things together. It had been complete one-way control. She didn't try to encourage change. She demanded surrender. She didn't create space for both of them to be different. She erased every part of him that didn't fit her mold. And he had accepted that. For 7 months. He used to think that if he just kept compromising, kept changing, maybe she'd be happier. And love would come back. But no, the more he stepped back, the more he was shoved into the shadows. The quieter he became, the more invisible he was. That night, after her rage burned out and she finally fell asleep, he sat alone in the living room. In his hand was a small piece of the broken controller. Still curved, still shaped like it used to be, but cracked clean in two. He looked at it like a mirror. One part crushed, the other desperately trying to hold on. And in that moment, he knew. He didn't want to hide anymore, didn't want to live a double life, didn't want to keep paying for love with pieces of who he was. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, not to meditate, not to prepare his usual healthy breakfast, but to sit down and write a letter, his first and possibly his last, to his own wife. He knew that talking face to face would probably end the way it always did, shouting, insults, and more broken pieces. But this time, he didn't want a fight. He wanted clarity. No interruptions, no dominance, and most importantly, he wanted to hold on to his own voice, no matter what. The letter wasn't long, but it was the most honest summary of the 7 months he had spent quietly hurting. "I've tried to understand you, tried to live up to the standards you set, tried not to let you down. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. The models you smashed, the toys you burned, the games you called a waste of time, they were all a part of me, a part I cherished. I don't blame you for not sharing my interests, but I can't keep living in a relationship where the things I love are seen as sick and I'm treated like a child who needs fixing. Love cannot survive when one person is forced to erase their identity just to fit into someone else's mold. If you still love me, truly love me, then we need a serious conversation, a real one, between two equals, two adults who both matter in this relationship." He left the letter on the kitchen table, where he knew she'd see it when she woke up. Then he walked out. He didn't take much. Just a small backpack with a few changes of clothes, an old Nintendo Switch, and a tiny stormtrooper model he had hidden for months. He didn't know exactly where he was going. But one thing he did know, he was done being a prisoner of someone else's emotions in his own life. That evening, his phone buzzed. A message from her. I read the letter. Call me when you're ready to talk. No apology, no anger. But for the first time in months, she let him choose when, without pressure, without commands. Maybe she wouldn't change. Maybe the marriage was already too far gone. But at least he had started again, from within himself. And if there was one thing he wanted to say to anyone stuck in a relationship where they were shrinking day by day, it would be this. Love cannot truly exist if you are no longer allowed to be yourself. Compromise? Yes, but never lose who you are.